Welcome and thank you for standing by. All participants are in a listen-only mode for the duration of today's session. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to your host, Jason Devine from the U.S. Census Bureau. Jason, you may begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar for the second 2010 census-based demographic and housing characteristics file demonstration product, also referred to as the DHC. It's nice to see some of you back who were with us for the first webinar for the first DHC demonstration product earlier this year in March, and we're glad to see those of you who were not. I'm Jason Devine. I work within the Population Division of the Census Bureau. My colleagues, Matt Spence and Alexandra Kraus, who will be presenting with me today, are also from the Population Division. We have been hard at work with the disclosure avoidance science team to make improvements from the first demonstration product while still maintaining disclosure protections. We're going to provide information today that will help you make use of the demonstration data released last Thursday and provide us with feedback. I'm going to go over some background. Matt is going to take a look at some of the metrics from the second demonstration product, and Alexandra is going to provide information about providing feedback. And then we'll take some of your questions. We also have other subject matter experts standing by to help us answer your questions. We only have an hour, so to help us focus, the purpose of our webinar today and the effort that we have been putting into these demonstration products is to provide transparency and understanding with the application of a new disclosure, new method for disclosure avoidance for the 2020 Census Demographic and Housing Characteristics file that is scheduled for release in May of next year. So we want to provide a complete package for you today, so I'm going to start by providing just a little bit of feedback information, and then before you know it, Matt will be going over some metrics with you. So the Census Bureau collects data from censuses, surveys, and administrative records. We are legally obligated to protect all data under U.S. Code Title 13. Historically, we have protected against disclosure of people's identities and their data by swapping data records across small geographies like blocks, blurring data by changing the values that are reported to make the responses less unique, or suppressing, which is simply not reporting the cell of a table because the number is too small. And we've also used other methods. But technology and computing power has advanced to the point that this is not enough. New methods are needed that more strongly protect against disclosure. And we've added a new tool called differential privacy to our toolbox. We are using it in our 2020 census data products to protect against disclosure. Next slide, please. Differential privacy inserts small differences in the counts of people and households so that it is difficult to identify people. It affects how useful the data are, especially at small levels of geography or small population groups. And data users have been concerned about how this approach will impact the data. But we are working to make the data as useful as possible within disclosure protection constraints. And to help us understand user needs, we have created demonstration products that show the proposed balance between data usefulness and protection. And feedback on those products allows us to understand how well user needs will be met, which helps in decision making. Today's webinar is intended to help you provide feedback on that balance. Next slide. This graphic shows you where we're at on our work with the 2020 census data products. We've already released the apportionment counts, which were released as they were without differential privacy being applied. But we also released the redistricting file, which was the first product to use differential privacy. That was released first on August 12th, 2021, and then again in a different format in September. But now we're focused on that box that shows in the middle, which includes the demographic profile and the demographic and housing characteristics file. The demographic and housing characteristics file, which has a planned release of May of 2023, is the product we're focusing on today. And that also includes the demographic profile, since most of the tables in the demographic profile, or all of the tables really, can be sourced from the demographic and housing characteristics file. There are other products as well, the detailed DHC-A, which has a planned release date of August of 2023, and the detailed DHC-B, and supplemental DHC, or the SDHC, which have release dates to be determined. So while we are working on those, the focus of our presentation today will be on the demographic and housing characteristics file, and that's that's what the demonstration product that we released last week and we're talking about today represents. There are some other products that will be part of future efforts. That includes a public use microdata sample file as well as a special tabulations program. Got a little bit of an advanced look at the next slide, so we can move to that next slide now. This is a graphic that's available on our website, and it shows our timeline for the work on the demographic and housing characteristics file. You can see it started back in 2019, which is when we were working on the disclosure avoidance system that was supporting the redistricting product, but at that time we also included some of the variables from the DHC in those early demonstration products. But then I'll skip forward to the larger bar that shows 2022. That's the work we're engaged in right now, and I already mentioned that we had released a first round of demonstration data, and you can see there that was released back in March, and then there was a 30-day review period, and that takes us into where we are now with the second demonstration product. After the first round of demonstration product, we took the feedback that we received, we actually summarized it and provided it, made it available to the public through a report which is available online, so people could see the feedback that we received on that first demonstration product, as well as our summary of that feedback, so people could see the things that we heard or that we saw through that feedback. We went through a tuning process, a tuning stage, where we worked to make improvements to the disclosure avoidance system. That led to the development of the second demonstration product, which, as I said, was released last week, and is what we're going to be talking about today. And what we have 30 days to provide feedback on that demonstration product as we move into the period after that, which includes the final settings for the disclosure avoidance system, and then we'll move into the final processing for the DHC product to meet that May 2023 release date. There's some additional information down at the bottom of the slide that shows information about the demonstration data products and what they are and why we produce them, as well as DCEP decision points. DCEP is our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, and is composed exclusively of senior career officials. And they determine the final settings for the privacy loss budget across geography types. And they make those determinations based on analysis of data quality and disclosure risk. And you can see on the timeline that there's a point there where the DCEP decision will be made about the final settings for the DHC, and we will be considering the feedback that we receive over the next several weeks in those decisions. Next slide, please. The DHC data product provides tables with demographic and housing information from the 2020 census. It includes data such as sex, age, Hispanic origin, race, relationship to household type, such as family, non-family, household size and tenure, which is owner or renter occupied, and vacancy status. Counts by race and Hispanic origin, along with house unit counts, were released in the redistricting file and will also be included in the DHC. And the way the disclosure avoidance system for the DHC works is it will maintain those data that have already been released as part of the redistricting file exactly as they were in the redistricting file. So those will be carried forward without no additional noise added, and they'll be reflected in the DHC just as they were when they were released as part of the redistricting product. I'll just note here that it does not include tables on education attainment, income, or poverty, data available in other Census Bureau products. The geographies vary by table, but many of the tables will be available in all geographies. So, for example, they'll be available at the nation, state, county, tract, block group, block, place, American Indian Alaska Native areas, essentially all of the geographies that we release data for. Many of the tables will be available for those levels of geography. And those are also reflected in the demonstration product. So the demonstration product essentially includes all of the tables and geographies that we plan to release data for when we actually release the 2020 data in May of 2023. Next slide. Some tables in the DHC are provided by the following categories or combinations of categories. Categories include those listed here: white alone, black or African American alone, American Indian Alaska Native alone, Asian alone, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander alone, then a category for some other race alone, two or more races, Hispanic or Latino, white alone, and non-Hispanic or Latino. But it does not include detailed race, ethnicity, or American Indian, Alaska Native tribe and village populations. Those are included in the detailed products that I mentioned earlier. That includes the detailed DHC and detailed DHCP data products. Next slide. So for these demonstration products, the Census Bureau applies new disclosure avoidance protection to the 2010 census tables. The Census Bureau then produces measures of the differences from the 2010 census tables and releases these as detailed summary metrics. And Matt is going to show you some of these a little later. We then release the demonstration tables and the measures of the differences, and the public can analyze the differences between the demonstration data and the 2010 census data. Basically, the question that people ask when they look at these products is, how far off are the two values? You have the published, the 2010 census data, and then you have our demonstration data, which has the new disclosure avoidance methodology applied. You can look at those two products and come up with measures and assess for yourself how far off those two values are, and that provides an indication of the noise that's been added for the disclosure avoidance protections. I'll note here, though, that because the release product includes protections from swapping, it's not exactly a perfect comparison, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it does provide a very good indication of the noise that's been added through those comparisons between the demonstration product and the published data. Then the public assesses the impact for different uses of the data and then provides feedback to the Census Bureau through our 2020 DAS@census.gov email address. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, from the time we put out the first demonstration product and we received feedback on that product, we were working to make improvements in the DHC demonstration data. But there are also some other changes as well. The second round of demonstration data includes tables and geographies that were added to the demographic and housing characteristics product. We lowered the proposed level of geography from state or county level to the census tract level for 16 tables and 63 iterated tables, or tables repeated by race and ethnicity. We added a sex by single year of age table repeated by race and ethnicity at the tract level. These additions were based on data user feedback from the first demonstration product. We increased accuracy across many topics, and you're going to see some of this later, more information about this later. And we've made improvements to supporting materials, such as the 2020 Census Data Planning Crosswalk. And this round of demonstration products, we've released the person and house unit summary files together. The previous demonstration product, there was a little bit of a delay between the release of the person sourced tables and the house and unit file source tables. Next slide. So we have a public feedback request. We'd like for you to analyze the differences between the demonstration data and the 2010 census data. If the numeric differences were the same in the 2020 census tables, the tables that will be released in May of 2023, as those in the 2010 demonstration data product, would there be specific tables or geographies where the differences would be acceptable? In other words, you look at the differences, you look at how far off the published tables are from the demonstration tables. Are those differences acceptable to you? Would there be specific tables or geographies where the differences would not be acceptable? So when you look at those differences, do the differences that you see either for individual geographies or variables or for aggregates of variables as an average measure, do those differences, are they not acceptable for you? If they're not acceptable, how would that impact your uses of the data? I'll mention here that this is the last demonstration product, an opportunity to provide feedback before the disclosure avoidance settings for the DHC are finalized. I'll say that one more time. This is the last demonstration data product, an opportunity to provide feedback before the disclosure avoidance settings for the DHC are finalized. Next slide, please. All right. Well, thank you. That was the background that I have for today. Now I will turn it over to Matt Spence, who will go over some of the results, some of the metrics for the second round demonstration product, some of the things that we've looked at, and some of the things that you can look at and see for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. As Jason said, my name is Matt Spence. I'm in the Population Division, and I'm going to be walking through some of what we call the detailed summary metrics, which are really the best way to start to assess the usability of the data as we put out this second demonstration data product. The reason I say that it's the best is because each table is focused on one characteristic, like total population, and one geography, like counties. Here's a snippet from one of the tables, and you can see, we've got a little bit of information here about what the table is, what the universe is. Are we talking about persons, or are we talking about housing units? What kind of geography are we talking about? Are we talking about states, tracts, counties, incorporated places? Here, again, we're talking about total population, so counts of all persons at the county level. And the main statistic that we're going to focus on today is what I've sort of taken to calling the how far off measure. You can imagine a dartboard with a bullseye, and the bullseye is, the value that is the published 2010 value. So now, as Jason mentioned, and as we're clear to say, the published 2010 value does include some noise due to swapping. I really want to make that clear. But that's the sort of target that we've measured against for these detailed summary metrics. So that bullseye is in the center, and then the question is, how close are the values to the center? How far off are we on average? This captures both accuracy and bias, but really mainly it captures accuracy. So there are many, many metrics that we're going to go through in the spreadsheet, but we're going to focus on this mean absolute error, this MAE, which measures, again, how far off is the count here of persons at the county level on average. So how do we calculate this? So first, let's look at how far off is the count. That is, again, we line up the published number. This is, again, counties. So we've got all 3,143 counties that are stateside in 2010. We put what was the published population, before differential privacy. What is the population after the application of differential privacy? And how far off is it? Is it plus or is it minus? It doesn't matter. We just care how far off is that value. So we can see for Ottawa County, Alabama, the published data was 54,571. That went up to 54,574. So the how far off number is 3. The one below it also went up. It went up by 1. Baldwin County went up by 1, so that got a 1. Barber County went down by 1, so it also gets a 1, because again, all we care about is how far away is it, not necessarily which direction. Sometimes the value is exactly the same as what was published, so the far off was 0. So again, we do this for all 3,143 counties, and we take the average. We take the mean, and so we can say we're off by the mean. The calculator says 1.75. We can call that about 2. We're off by about 2 persons. So Bibb County is a sort of typical experience here. Now, for context, one of the things I like to do is when I'm thinking about is 2 a big number or not, I like to take the average size of the population as it was published, and that kind of gives me a sense for how big of an impact is this having on the overall question. So 2 might be very big if the average count is 2 or 5, but here you can see that the average county population, total population, is 98,233. So maybe that gets a little bit, sort of contextual, like lost in the noise a little bit. It's not so meaningful, impactful of a change. So we can find these averages on data.census.gov or other sources, just knowledge sort of about how big the size of my population is in question. So again, going back to this table, we calculated that average of 1.75. Here I'm putting the average population as sort of a contextual clue about how much do I need to be worried about this. And the takeaway is that the total population for the average county would be off by about 2. So that 98,233 might turn into 98,231, or it might turn into 98,235. Now, if your county is smaller, maybe you live in Loving County, Texas, still the average remains the same. It's about plus or minus 2. So Loving County, even though it's only 54 people, we know that on average it's about, you might go up 2, you might go down 2. You might go up by 3 or 4, or you might go only up by 1 or go down by 1. That's the nature of the average. So total population, as Jason was mentioning, total population is something that's already gone out as part of the redistricting data. These data that we're showing you, these demonstration data, for the whole time that we've been doing these demonstration data, have been 2010 data. So we've been looking at 2010 data because that allows us to compare the published to the differentially private number. So this again is now looking at 2010 data, but the total population, race and Hispanic origin counts, anything that was in the redistricting data has been locked as part of the production settings run. And so that will remain consistent. So that the level of noise, we know that the level of noise for the redistricting file is approximately the same as what was the production settings file. Okay, so we're going to move on now to something that we can actually give feedback on, detailed summary metrics for a DHC specific product. So here, household relationship status was actually not on, it's not on the redistricting data, and it was not even on early versions of the demonstration products. It's really just we had one release in March, and we had one release last week here in August that included data on household relationship status. So again, we're looking at persons and counties. And now, unlike for total population where there's just one number, we're going to provide one number for every single data item that is part of this variable. So this, again, this variable is household relationship status, and we have a variety of relationship categories. One of them is householder. So this is the person who filled out the census form. We have statistics on opposite sex, husband, wife, or spouse, opposite sex, unmarried partner, same-sex, husband, wife, or spouse, same-sex, unmarried partner, biological son or daughter, adopted son or daughter, etc., all the way through down through non-relative. So one question that comes up is, are we sure we're looking at 2010 data when we're seeing things like same-sex, husband, wife, spouse? And the answer is yes. This is, in fact, 2010 data. This is 2010 data where we've sort of reversed an edit to allow us to get a sense of what the responses were for same-sex husband, wife, spouse. We sort of undid the edit that we did. We have more details on this on our website, but suffice it to say that the input file and the file that sort of makes up our metrics includes data for same-sex husband, wife, spouse in 2010. So again, this is all 2010 data, but this will give us a good sense for 2020 because it reflects the updated relationship categories. And there's more details on that in the crosswalk that we can walk through as well. So, okay, what about the data? What about the data? I'm putting how far off that MAE, mean absolute error, and I put the average population here in the final column. So for householders, again, thinking about counties, the average mean absolute error was 7, plus or minus 7 people out of an average population of 37,135. So for the average county, we might see 37,128, or we might see 37,142. That's the average. Again, some will have less change, some will have more change. We have other metrics that talk a little bit more about outliers and things like that, but in general, we can say that we're focusing on the average, and that's the average amount of change. So now imagine, as you're reviewing this, the kind of feedback that is very, very helpful for us is whether these counts would be acceptable. If we published 37,128, or if we published 37,142, would that make a big difference for your use case? Is that something that would be noticeable? Will that affect funding formulas? Would that affect your school planning or your government, works, that sort of thing? Will that affect any kind of research that you're doing? These are the kinds of questions that we're really hoping that you can answer for us. And again, if either of these counts were produced sort of on average, would you be able to use the data for your purposes, or would the data be so bad that you have to seek alternate data sources or otherwise just not do the research? So householder, again, is about 7. And you can see that, this is why it's important to put the average population side by side, because you might think, oh, well, biological son or daughter, that's got 10. That's much less accurate than, say, opposite sex unmarried partner, which is 5. But you can see that the population of biological sons or daughters of the householder is about 10 times, the population is about 10 times the size of opposite sex unmarried partners on average. Again, this is across all counties, the average population. So that's why I really like to have these as sort of a contextual, kind of cue for how much does this mean absolute error sort of matter. So there's another way to use the detailed summary metrics, and now that we have 2 detailed summary metrics documents, one from March and one now from August, we can put them side by side and see, whether things got better or things got worse. So let's first look at one where things got better. We see improvements for some of these age categories. So again, this is sex by 5-year age groups. This is just the total. So this is, both sexes, males and females. There are other rows in table 16A that go through male age groups, male 5-year age groups, and female 5-year age groups. But here we're just looking at totals. So now we're just looking at the how far off. We're just looking at the mean absolute error. So the question is, which got better, which got worse? Well, so under 5 years, it went from 7.75 to 7.98. Now, that is most likely just due to chance. That's just most likely due to, part of differential privacy is the insertion of random noise, sort of disguise, to protect confidentiality and disguise respondents. So this is likely just due to noise. But again, if this changes your opinion of the data from acceptable to unacceptable, we do want to hear about it. I won't tell you don't respond. Please do respond if this really impacts your use of the data. Likewise, for 5 to 9 and 10 to 14, we're seeing slightly higher numbers, but within about 1/2 of a person. And again, because this is now persons, and we're looking at mean absolute error, keep in mind that this is we're looking at counts of persons here. So where do we see improvements? Well, we see improvements for nearly all 5-year age categories that are beyond that. So 15 to 19 went from 12 down to about 11. Not a big increase. Perhaps that is also due to chance. But some of these other ones, you can see we've really been able to improve on. We're seeing a lot more accuracy for example, 20 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 29-year-olds. And there are other improvements here that I'm not showing just for reasons of space, but also we're seeing improvements in 85 to 89-year-olds. Look, you can see that the average count was off by about 24 people in the March release, and now it's off by about 6. So we believe that for many use cases where we're looking at population pyramids, where we're looking at individual using age adjustments for disease models and things like that, that having better, more reliable age data will be better. Will make everything sort of more accurate. Another thing I want to spotlight, so something that we sort of promised to address and we were able to address in our first newsletter, is the centenarians. So centenarians are people who are, aged 100 or older. You can see just in general that the how far off numbers have gone way down. They look pretty small to begin with, but these are very small populations in general. And because so many counties actually had 0 centenarians, this actually kind of understates the magnitude of the change. Even though this, mean absolute error was, seems small, they all were going up. All these counties went from 0 people 110 and older to 2 or 3 or 4. And so suddenly now we had, a skyrocketing population of people who are older than 110 years old. And that obviously is something that would raise eyebrows. And so we were able to fix that. And as highlighted in our most recent newsletter, there is that bias is removed. One thing I want to note before I move on is that there were 2 versions of the March 16th metrics posted on our website. The first version was published on March 16th, but that included an error in the allocation of privacy loss budget. We ended up accidentally flipping the allocation of privacy loss budget upside down so that Nation got a very small allocation when it was meant to get a very big allocation, and Block got a very big allocation when it was meant to get a very small allocation. So we re-released metrics in July that fixed this error, and we called it, the as intended version. Now we've made that very clear in the READMEs, and we'll see that in just a second when we go to the spreadsheets. But that is something that I wanted to point out to people, as we're moving forward. Oops. So, the question is now, is this data more usable? If we have better feedback, if you can tell us, yes, things look better, then that is also welcome feedback. We're very happy to hear good stories as well as room for improvement. So where's something that needed room for improvement? Where's something that we took a little bit of a step backwards? Well, we took a little bit of a step backwards in the tenure by race of householder for counties. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? So tenure by race of householder is a measure of whether you're in an owner-occupied house, and then the counts of how many of owner-occupied houses have white alone householders, how many of them have Black alone householders, American Indian, Alaska Native alone householders, et cetera. And then 2 or more races are a sort of remainder category for those householders. So we have different counts for owner-occupied and renter-occupied. And a lot of people use this data for things like looking at, the Black versus white home ownership rate in counties or tracts or things like that. So we know that this is a very important metric. This is a very important piece of data that we need to get right. So what happened? Why are we seeing higher numbers in August when we had lower numbers in March? Well, what happened was we were initially just using owner-occupied versus renter-occupied in all of our post-processing or, especially those, early on queries. We were using just owner-occupied versus renter-occupied. But in fact, there are 3 different tenure levels. There's owned with a mortgage, which is different from owned without a mortgage, and rented. Now, the owned with a mortgage and owned without a mortgage, the populations are very different. And we do know that people use this distinction with a mortgage versus without a mortgage to look at things like housing affordability and sort of patterns in, housing affordability by race or by Hispanic origin. And what we were seeing is that there was a bias that was essentially overcounting the number of Black and Latino, Hispanic homeowners without a mortgage and undercounting the number of white homeowners without mortgages. So it gave a skewed picture of housing affordability. It made things look rosier, perhaps, than they should have been. So we needed to change this post-processing to have 3 different tenure levels. So now that's a lot of background information, but the bottom line is, are these data still usable? If the amount of if the amount of error was acceptable before and is no longer acceptable, please let us know. Let us know, does this impact, your research again on, housing affordability or, rental ownership patterns? Does this affect, grants or other funding sources? This is really where we're hoping for a lot of good comments. And you'll see that, not everywhere had a big increase. Some remained fairly small, but these were sort of fairly small to begin with for the Mid-Hawaiian Pacific Islander householders. Okay, so I'd like to take a second we've been walking through a PowerPoint, and I'd like to just sort of show what the actual spreadsheet looks like. So this is the actual spreadsheet that you can download from our website. We've done a great job making it a little bit more visible and showing off where it is. We've got a README tab, which shows all of the different versions of these demonstration data. Now, you remember earlier when I said the production settings run was 2010 data that was run through the same process that the redistricting data, the same software with the same settings that the redistricting data was. That's right here. That was released in June of 2021. And we've, held things like total population, counts by major GQ type, race, and Hispanic origin down to the block the same. So if you're happy with those counts in the redistricting data, you will be happy with the counts in the DHC data because they're the exact same. If you're unhappy with them, I'm afraid that they've already been released. And so we have to sort of focus on what we can give comments on. As I mentioned before, there were 2 different versions of the original March data. The re-released data in July reflect the as intended allocations, so giving nation much more, state much more, and block group and block a lot less. What we've noticed is that really affects, state data get a lot more accurate in these metrics. Tract and county data remain about the same. And where we see that is in block group data. The block group data are getting much less accurate, but we don't have a lot of tables on block group data in these metrics. If you want to look at block group data, you'll have to look at the summary files themselves or use IPUM's data for that. So this README tab is the first one that should open. The second tab has a list of all tables. Now, a lot of these tables, as I was mentioning, a lot of these tables we've already seen and we've already kind of released data on. These are already sort of locked. But we include them here for context. We include them here for reference. And down here is where we start to get into some of the DHC content. And then we also have other DHC-specific content in some of these use cases, and then really in this full DHC variables use case. So these correspond to these different tabs down here. So let's start with updated BAP. You remember I was giving the example of total population, mean absolute error, 1.75. That's it right here. Mean absolute error is generally the first column of data that you'll see, other than the counts of units. But it's the first bit of metrics that you'll see. That is, hopefully sort of anchors you to where we are. We include a lot of other data too, root mean squared error, mean absolute percent error, CV, coefficient variation, mean algebraic percent error, and then counts of outliers. But in general, again, I tend to focus on mean absolute error because that I think is the best way to sort of focus on, again, how far off are these counts. So again, we saw 1.75 with all counties, total population at the county level. So that kind of anchors us. Now, I said all of these have been released already as part of the redistricting data, but we wanted to keep it there just so people could verify that those numbers were the same, and they could see for context how big are some of these, mean absolute errors, at the tract level, for example. Okay, so we're going to keep scrolling down. So we start to have sex by selected age groups, so under 18, 18 to 64, and 65 and over. You can see different, mean absolute errors for those. We see that for the same sort of characteristic, sex by selected age groups, now for incorporated places. And then we do the same for tracts, census tracts. So now you can kind of get a sense of how this spreadsheet works. Generally, there's one characteristic that we look at across different geographies. Now, this is what we were looking at before. This is where we saw, a big improvement in the amount of error from last time. This is sex by 5-year age groups for counties. Realize I've got it on the, ant size setting here. I apologize for that. But yeah, so, again, this is where we were seeing a lot of improvement, from before. And because of the way that, things like disease patterns and other age-adjusted variables are calculated, we believe that more accurate age will sort of carry through to more accurate statistics in general. So like I said, we've got total, and then we've got it for males and then females. And then we repeat the same thing for incorporated places. We do the same thing for tracts. So we can see now, like I know a lot of people use tract level data to get to sort of measure neighborhood effects. You can see that, on average, the counts of, say, 25 to 29-year-olds are off by about 3.6 people. So say 4 people. So if if your tracts count of 25 to 29-year-olds was off by 4 people, is that going to make a big difference to you for your uses? That's what we are really hoping to hear from you. We also look at Puerto Rico geographies. Here's municipios, Puerto Rico tracts. We also look at AIM geographies. So these are federal Indian reservation and off-reservation trust lands. Oklahoma tribal statistical areas, Alaska Native Village statistical areas, and, et cetera. We also look at, things like absolute change in median age and sex ratios to see sort of how are things changing there, these average statistics changing. I know I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, so I'm going to move quickly. Updated use cases where I like to look are, that we have single year of age statistics for things like counties and various school districts. We've heard a lot from data users about single year of age accuracy for those under 18 for geographies like counties or school districts. So I encourage you to look there and give us feedback on that. And then the full DHC use cases, this whole tab is really worth going through both alone and then sort of in reference to the March release. You can see that now, as we saw before, the universe was units, not persons. So if we say that the owned with a mortgage count at the state level is off by 9.5, that means that on average, a state might gain or lose 10 or so housing units that are owned with a mortgage. So that's obviously a very small count, a very small relative count, a very small relative difference there. So we repeat this again for different geographies, counties, incorporated places, tracts, that sort of thing. So here you can see like the tenure is off by about 1 or 2 units at the tract level. And then we include occupancy, tenure versus renter, tenure, owner versus renter tenure for different householder ages, different householder races, and Hispanic origins. And then closer to the bottom, I'd like to make sure that people don't stop scrolling too soon. closer to the bottom, we have data on another piece of data that's unique to the DHC, which is presence of own children and couple type and household type. So here we can see, different types of households with own children under 18. We can also see, different kinds of couple types at different geographies. So here's the county level. You can see what the overall error metrics are for these different kinds of couple type households. So we really encourage you to take a look at all of these data and please give us feedback, because again, this is the shot to do it. With that, I'm going to turn us back over to Alexandra, and thank you.
Great, thanks, Matt. So the Census Bureau implements disclosure avoidance to protect your confidentiality. This decade is a little different because we're implementing differential privacy. We're using 2010 census data to show how differential privacy impacts or changes the data. We're asking for your feedback for specific topics, tables, or geographies to answer the question, are these differences acceptable or unacceptable? Since the last demonstration product, we've made some improvements, which are listed on the next slide. Matt went over some of these, but in addition, the centenarians, which is people aged 100 or more, relationship to household, detailed group quarters type, age of householder, presence of own children, tenure, household or housing unit characteristics more generally, and also unified school districts. So these are some of the areas where you may see improvements if you've been following along with these demonstration data. But we're asking, were these improvements good enough? Are they acceptable now, or do they still need improvement? On the next slide, you'll see a few improvements that did not make it into the current demonstration data product, but we are still exploring. This includes elementary and secondary school districts, single year of age for children under 18 years, and some of the lower level geographies, such as block group. And so this is another area that you can explore more, although there's other areas as well too. So Matt went over the detailed summary metrics, which are a perfect starting place. Once you open up the Excel document, they can be a little overwhelming because we want to include as much information as possible. But as Matt showed you, we have different tabs. You can also kind of look by topic as well and find the content that you are most interested in. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, you can look at the demonstration tables via the summary file format, which are also posted on our website. Those require additional processing in order to analyze the data. IPLUMs may generate comparison tables from the summary files. They've done this in the past, so you can always check out that great resource. And Census Bureau also release like newsletters and webinars like these that include some of the highlights. And so if this is as far as you make it and you have feedback based on this, please send it in to us. You can also check out external data users analysis. Some people provide this as a resource for other people, and so you can always use that as well. And then, of course, you can always reach out to us to help you with your analysis as well. We have a few tips for conducting your analysis. So one, we recommend that you aggregate block level data. Block level data shouldn't be used on its own, but rather aggregating to create a new geography. And then in addition, if you're doing an analysis, we recommend that you include zero counts. So for example, in the detailed summary metrics that Matt reviewed, if the published and differentially private counts are both zero, we count that as no difference or 0% change. So it gives us credit for not having a different count. If the published count is 0 and the differentially private count is not, we count that as a 200% change no matter what the number is, because those percent changes can be very large for very small numbers, which may kind of distort the picture a little bit. And then finally, be mindful when comparing. This is something that Matt and Jason both alluded to, but differential privacy is applied to the non-private 2010 census data, whereas the published 2010 census data have undergone the swapping method of disclosure avoidance. So some differences may be due to swapping. One way to provide feedback, there's a lot of different ways to provide feedback, but I just wanted to go over, maybe one more simplistic way would be to just download those detailed summary metrics that Matt went over, and then open up a Word document or an equivalent and just document which tables and geographies look good, which tables and geographies need improvement. And if they need improvement, provide a reasonable numeric difference if you can provide that. And then send this feedback to 2020 DAS at census.gov. So on the next slide, I'll kind of go over what this could look like. So right here, you see the detailed summary metrics. We're looking at household type by presence of owned children under 18 for county. So you pull up that Word document, and you can just put, an acceptable column, and mark that as acceptable. So if you click one more time, you'll see that example here. Perfect. And so right here, you can just see there's an acceptable column, and you just identify the topic and the geography, which is important. And so maybe you look at all counties, or maybe you look at a specific county, or specific county size, and you can kind of just list it here. Then you scroll down the metrics further. So if we click again, you'll see another example of the metrics. And so maybe you might skip a few tables. You don't have to provide feedback on everything, but you go to the next topic of interest, which here might be presence of owned children under 6 for counties. So you're looking at these, and maybe you look at the all counties, which has a mean absolute error of 26.5. And maybe you think to yourself, okay, this is, unacceptable for my use case. Then if you click again, you'll see an example on this Word document where we have labeled it unacceptable, for example, and provided that bullet there. So if you click one more time, you'll see that example. Great. And so here you can see that we identified the topic, the geography level, and then we just put something like, 26 is too far off. And if you can provide a difference that would be acceptable. So here it was 10. And we also put for my use case school planning. So your feedback can be as simple as this. Of course, the more information we have, the better. So if you can dig a little bit further into that use case, that would be great. But even if you, just provide something like this feedback is very important for us. And so on the next slide, we have some upcoming outreach that will be focused on the tribal consultation, the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates fall meeting, the National Advisory Committee special session to obtain some feedback, and the Census Scientific Advisory Committee, or CSAC. And so finally, on the last slide, we just want to say again, your feedback is very important. We will consider your feedback when making final decisions to finalize the production settings for the DHC. And your feedback is due Monday, September 26th. And so we really look forward to your feedback. And on the next slide, you'll see our contact information, just in case you have any questions. Maybe you open up those detailed summary metrics and you kind of, you're overwhelmed, you're not sure how to interpret any of those measures. You can contact us and we will be happy to help you. With that, I'll give it back over to Jason.
Thank you, Alexandra and Matt. And we've received some really good questions in the Q&A window, and we were wondering if everybody could see all of our responses or just the individual who sent the question. But I think you can see all of the responses, right? So that's good. I want to say a little bit about something that's a little bit confusing, and maybe we didn't help in my response, but the redistricting data being carried forward, you have to think of it in terms of understanding kind of where we are with the release of the data products and then where we are with the demonstration products. So because the redistricting product has already been released, the disclosure avoidance system to support that product has already been developed, and we went through a similar process of receiving feedback and tuning that system and setting the parameters for that system. So those parameters are fixed. So we have to carry those parameters forward through our demonstration data. So it's an earlier demonstration data, the production settings demonstration product for the redistricting data that includes those 2010 protected redistricting data values that are then carried forward through the DHC demonstration products. So if you were to make comparisons, you'd have to make, to see if there were, what the difference is where you'd have to compare back to that production setting demonstration product, which there will also be a production setting product for the DHC later as well. Matt, does that seem like I described that right?
Yes, that's right.
Great. So we have a few minutes, and we're limited to answering questions just in the chat. So let me see if there's any that we are able to adjust. There were some questions about outliers. That was a very good question. We didn't present too much in the way of outliers today, but the data is there for you in the demonstration product. Demonstration product includes tables for all different levels of geography, so you can look at those values and compare them back to the 2010 release data. And as I said earlier, you can look at differences for individual areas. You can look at aggregate measures like Matt went through with mean absolute errors or other measures like that. Or you can take, maybe for your state, for the type of geography, if you're interested in counties, you could look at all of the counties in your state and just, put in a spreadsheet the differences and look to see the distribution of differences to get an idea for what the outliers look like. That's something that's possible with the demonstration data. There was another sort of series of questions, trying to go back and look, that I thought maybe we could address. Well, not really. So I'll let if Alexandra or Matt or if anybody else who has the ability to speak for this webinar, if they want to add anything or to address any of the questions that they've seen in the window, we have about a minute and a half to do that before we have some concluding remarks.
One thing I did see is Amigo's comment at about 3:56. Says that, can you provide a threshold, something like a minimum count, that would indicate that the cell is potentially misleading and should not be used? So, really, currently the best thing that we've produced are things like these metrics documents and these demonstration data products. This currently is the best way to assess data usefulness and sort of data error. Another good way, I'm going to plug IPHMS again. They're working on producing side-by-side counts for different characteristics for each geography. So instead of looking at like opposite sex married couple household and looking at just the MAE and some of these other metrics like counts of outliers, they'll list, okay, here's Los Angeles County, here's Montgomery County, Maryland, here's Loving County, Texas. And they'll put, here's the opposite sex married couple household on one cell, one column, and here's the differentially private demonstration data on the next side. Now again, that comparison kind of overstates the amount of error a little bit because some of the error introduced is due to swapping, but a large part of that error is due to differential privacy. So that is probably the best way to assess whether something is good. And then you can also look back at our prior webinars. We've talked about, don't use block level data, gather block, use the highest geographic level that's possible. Tracks will be much more accurate than blocks. Tracks will be much more accurate than block groups. Counties should be even still more accurate, especially relative to the overall population. So that's our feedback, try to get more larger, more populous areas to reduce that error, increase that reliability.
Great. Yeah, I see a question from Pete Borsella about the final tables for the DHC. Right now, the demonstration data product and also the updated 2020 census data product planning crosswalk includes all the tables at the level of geography that we are proposing for the final settings. And what you will see that is different from the previous crosswalk and demonstration data product is that we did add some sex by single year of age iterations, which just means those tables that are repeated by race ethnicity. That was based on data user feedback. And we've also changed the geography from state or county to tract for many tables. I'm talking about the lowest level of geography. And so those two updates to the crosswalk, which impact a lot of tables, were based on data user feedback. And you will see those updates in the demonstration data product this time around.
All right, well, thank you, Alexandra and Matt, and thank you for joining us today. We look forward to your feedback. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to use the 2020-census.gov email address, and we look forward to your feedback. And again, this is the final opportunity to provide feedback on the DHC demonstration product before we make finalize the settings for the disclosure avoidance system that's going to protect that product. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.